Good afternoon. I'm Dr. Terry James Gingras, and this is Dr. G's ADHD Chat, show that's trying to make the world safe for ADHDers. We are learning about ADHD all the time, and there's been quite a lot of progress made since I was the father of a young child that I was wondering what the heck was going on. I'm a clinical psychologist and neuropsychologist. I am in private practice. At least 50% of my practice is ADHD. I do a lot of assessments now. Do a lot of adults as well as kids. Tell you the truth, the adults probably bother me more than the kids do. I know if you're a kid with ADHD, you're being identified at the right time of life. When you're an adult, in your 30s or some even 40s or later, and you're just being identified with ADHD, wow, have you wasted a lot of time. And it is, it's almost painful sometimes, when I have to give somebody a feedback session and I tell them, you have ADHD. And I get a lot of different responses. Some people are depressed, sad. I've wasted so much time. Oh my God. Or some people are angry. Why didn't somebody find us out sooner? Why didn't somebody check me when I was a kid? And some of them are actually just relieved that, hey, I knew something was off, but I'm glad to have the answer now. But there's still the notion, and it's hard to, when you pick people up after they've had 20 or 30 years of not quite fitting in, of not quite achieving like everybody else does, and not knowing why. It takes a long time to therapize them out of that, if you will. And they start recognizing that they're not, as Ms. Kelly's book says, not lazy, crazy, or stupid. It takes a long time to start really believing that. And then it takes a long time to start seeing what you need to be doing. Because most of the common solutions, and most of the common solutions you're going to get going to a therapist who doesn't know much about ADHD, are the kinds of things that aren't really going to work for you very well, I'm sorry to say. Your ADHDers, their brains are not defective by a long shot. Matter of fact, most ADHDers are above average intelligence. But they've got what Dr. William Dodson calls an interest-based attention system, which, when you think about it, marvelously explains a whole bunch of things. If you've had an ADHD kid and you've wondered, what the heck? How come sometimes he gets straight A's and sometimes he flunks everything? What's up with that? Well, the stuff he flunked didn't interest him, okay? And the stuff that he did really well on grabbed his attention, and that's the way it is. And that's why ADHDers also don't typically make very good employees, because just because it's important to the boss doesn't mean it's important to them, which, been there a few times myself, come to think of it. But you've got to work on the strength areas that ADHDers do have. And one of the main thing is creativity. That's why it's the title of today's thing. ADHDers are, by definition, creative. The reason they're creative is because they can't help themselves. They can't think inside the box. They will never be good cubicle dwellers. And like I said, they don't work for others terribly well unless it's a very specialized kind of situation and arrangement. ADHDers are marvelous at being entrepreneurs. One expert on ADHD estimates that 80% of all entrepreneurs have diagnosable ADHD. And may be right. I go to a lot of conferences where entrepreneurs frequent, and I continually am. By about the second day, they start figuring out that, oh, hey, this guy knows about ADHD, and I am conducting a side seminar for answering all their questions. I mean, the deal with ADHD and the deal with parenting an ADHD kid, and it's you've really got to drop a lot of the assumptions you have about the way kids are supposed to be and the way parenting is supposed to be to work with ADHD kids, because they're just a little different. Okay, they're smart as a whip. They usually have great senses of humor, mostly because they see the world a little differently, and they're creative. You know, they tend to be. Oh, look, if I put this together with this, and then this happens, and that kind of thing. And they just, the problem is if a teacher tells them they need to have a paper in 2 weeks, God, the world will end. There's such gnashing of teeth and whining and wailing. It's amazing. So, I mean, this typical school system is not made for ADHD kids. It's made for what we call neurotypical kids. Those are the kids who do what they're told when they're told, without necessarily even knowing why they're doing it. Those are the ones that the school system is designed for. The ones who ask questions all the time, who think outside the box. It's not going to fit very well. So, your job as a parent to recognize their strengths, particularly their creativity, because that's how they're going to make their way in the world. And so you've got to do what you can to encourage that, okay? Whether it's equipment or lessons or groups of people who do the same thing, whatever. But you really want to encourage that in them. Everybody has some strengths in some areas, and it's important as a parent, especially if you're the parent of an ADHD kid, is that you spend some time really looking at your kid and figuring out what his or her strengths are. For some it'll be music, for some it'll be art, for some it'll be athletics. I dare say that almost every pop musician in the world is probably ADHD, and a lot of our most creative people are ADHD. I mean, creative people are the ones that do make the changes that make the world different and better, hopefully. Okay, so it's important to encourage that. It's important to see that as important. And it's easy as a parent to get stuck, hung up on what was expected of you, kind of thing. I was raised in the generation where you go to school, you get good grades, you go to college, you graduate from college, you get a good job, you stay in that job till golden watch time comes and you retire. Of course, the world isn't like that anymore. And fortunately for ADHDers, it's not like that anymore. There are so many more options, so many more ways to get advanced training, some of which work better for ADHDers than others, Some ADHD kids just love online stuff, taking courses online. Some can't stand it. And it's, there's no real way to tell for sure, but you want to encourage them to develop their strengths, and make sure you check out Creativity very closely, because that's likely to be one of the ones that's really strong and will likely be what they do in their lives, how they, they develop things, they build things, they, I think I've already mentioned I usually do every week that I have a child or an adult now with ADHD, and he's a creator. He's a creator, and he's the kind of guy who also likes to do sales and that sort of thing. He's always been a trader. I'll give you two of these, you give me one of those kind of things. And then I've got a brother. It's like he's an artist and a musician, and he's terrible with money. Well, anyway, but I'm pretty sure that he's got some of the same stuff that my son has, which I don't know means probably the ADHD comes in a direct line through my family, although my wife's got people in her family tree who have actually been diagnosed and treated with. So maybe it was a double whammy, and we're lucky it only hit one of our kids. And I say lucky because, not that I don't, obviously I have some affinity for ADHD folks, but raising an ADHD kid, especially back when I was doing it and we didn't know anything, was a colossal pain. And it was occasionally, not just occasionally, it was a lot of times embarrassing, Things I had tried to avoid my whole life, like going to the principal's office, going to court, all of a sudden I was having to do all that. Going to there were just a lot of those kind of stern adult kind of meetings that I did not appreciate very much. So, especially now in this time where we're coming out from the pandemic, or probably some of us are getting ready to go back into quarantine because some people are being really stupid and getting themselves sick or getting other people sick. And so when that happens, they're going to slow things down again. And that's the way it is. But we have some time now that we haven't had in a long time, to do some things with our children, to encourage some creativity activities. I don't know, your child may be a great artist, drawing and that kind of thing, or maybe a great storyteller. And there's room in the world for those kind of folks too. Like I said, musicians, athletes, but be looking at the creativity thing. Be looking at that all the time, every day, and encouraging it. And that may well be the way they end up making their living. And the other big thing about ADHD that's interesting and sometimes concerns people a little bit is almost all of folks with ADHD have the ability to hyperfocus. They get locked into something, and man, they don't come out for hours and hours. So you're saying, wait a minute, attention deficit disorder, and he's in there or she's in there for 4 hours doing the same thing. That doesn't sound like bad and poor attention to me, and it's not. ADHD is probably very poorly named. What you've really got is you've got a different kind of attention system, and you've got very poor control over it, basically. So they don't have a lot of control over what they pay attention to. And you see this all the way from second grade all the way through to executives with ADHD trying to run a business. and not being sure why they're always ahead of everybody else in terms of new product development, but they can't seem to balance the books. Um, well, I work a lot. I do coaching with ADHD executives, and that's one of the things frequently that is an issue is they tend to crash and burn their businesses. They build a business and then they do some risky, impulsive thing and blow the business up, or can't be bothered to check the books, and somebody runs off with the cash, or never bothers to mark it in, or any number of bookkeeping kinds of things. So creativity is the strength area. Hyperfocus is one of those things that can help, especially if you're hyper-focusing on the same thing you're working in. Dynamite combination, but you have to learn how to control it. And well, we work on that sometimes. We will probably talk about that in the future. But your job right now is to recognize their strengths, encourage their creativity in whatever area it presents itself, and like all the rest of us ADHD parents, hope for the best. Okay, I'm Dr. Terry James Gingras. This has been Dr. G's ADHD Chat. It's a show for trying to make the world safe for ADHDers, because no conventional thinker ever changed the world. It takes people who think outside the box. And your ADHD child is one of those people. So maybe he or she will solve one of the big world problems. I certainly hope so. You can, underneath here, you can, ask questions, make comments. I'd appreciate it. My website is terrygingrasphd.com. And we'll probably have some things coming down the pike here in the not too distant future, in terms of courses and membership groups and that kind of thing. But right now, that's still in the development phase. So, catch you next week.